this battlefield and still inspires us today. Thank you.
Thank you. Everyone, and thank you for braving the wind and the day, but we're getting there. And thank you very much. I'm a member of Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity, and we're right up here on the hill in Hamilton Heights on 141st Street. And I was talking to some of I'm a retired colonel in the Air Force, and I asked a question if anyone knew James Bullard, Eugene Jacques Bullard. Has anyone ever heard of that name? And this was just last Saturday, and there must have been about 50 of us in the room, and nobody knew who he was. Okay, and I just want to speak to this hero for a few minutes, and this is definitely one that you go back to the internet and take a look at it. The advent of powered aviation was a new development to modern warfare. Many technological advances in weaponry, including the airplane, the machine gun, and communications, significantly affected modern warfare. Aviation was new, and like most opportunities, for lack of a better word, was denied to African Americans or Negroes or colored people. I would like to share some thoughts about Corporal Eugene Jacques Bullard, who is regarded as the first African American combat pilot and the second documented African American pilot. Does anybody know who the first one was? Bessie Coleman, a woman, African American woman. She was the first pilot in the United States. Okay, there are other pilots of color, including William Robinson Clark, a Jamaican, flying with the RAF in 1917, Ahmed Ali Selikin of Nigerian and African Turkish descent, flying with the Ottoman Air Force in 1916. Pierre Rajan of Martinique flew for France, and Domenico Mondelli from Eritrea flew for Italy. Eugene Bullard was born in Columbus, Georgia in 1895. His parents were expatriates of Haiti, which later enabled Eugene to join the French Foreign Legion after his arrival in Paris in 1914. He participated in the battles at the Somme, Champagne, and Verdun, where he was severely wounded in 1916. He served with the 170th French Infantry, known as the Black Swallows of Death. Upon his recuperation from his injuries, he became an aerial gunner and then a pilot. He flew his first combat mission on September 8th as a member of the Lafayette Flying Corps, which was a successor to the Lafayette Escadrille. The Lafayette Flying Corps was a name given to American volunteer pilots who flew for the French Air Force during World War I. It includes pilots who were with the bona fide Lafayette Escadrille Squadron. His aircraft's fuselage was inscribed "To le sang qui coule rouge." Did I get it right? Close? Okay. All blood runs red. All right, my French teachers would be very happy. Did I do okay, Jane? All right. So, and also, he was known as the Black Swallow of Death. Okay, but that came from, I think, the infantry, but that's what they called him when he flew. Unit flight records document that he flew 20 combat missions. He claimed 2 victories, which, however, remain undocumented. Let me see. The United States entered World War I on April 6, 1917. A medical board was convened to examine recruits from the Lafayette Flying Corps. While many American volunteers were accepted into the United States Army Air Corps, Bullard was not one of those accepted. He was deemed unfit. Of course, the U.S. Army Air Corps would only accept white applicants. Bullard continued to serve in the French Air Force until he encountered a disagreement with a French officer. I was trying to sort of color up, not with that disagreement, but I was reminded last night by one member of the committee, Guy DeVoe, that he was a boxer. Okay, he was a professional boxer, and I don't think the other French officer was. And he was probably a superior too. He was subsequently removed from aviation duties and transferred to a French service battalion until the Armistance in 1918. He received several military decorations, including the Croix de Guerre for his service and bravery. Eugene Bullard remained in France during the years between the wars. They call those the interwar years of 1919 to 1940. He became a drummer and ultimately owned a nightclub, L'Escadrille. His circle of friends and acquaintances included prominent figures in the Harlem Renaissance. And by the way, where are we now? Okay, so that's something else that you want to take a look at. Josephine Baker, Louis Armstrong, Langston Hughes, and others. Eugene answered the call to arms when the Germans invaded France in May 1940. He was wounded while fighting with the French 51st Infantry Regiment. He returned to the United States in 1940 and was a resident of Harlem until his death on October 12, 1961, at age 66. He was relatively unknown in the United States. In 1954, he was one of 3 men rekindling the frame of the Arc de Triomphe, and in 1959, President Charles de Gaulle called him, this is where I come, un véritable héros français. Okay? a true French hero. I know I'm butchering that up. As he was named a chevalier, okay, a chevalier, a knight, and awarded both the Legion of Honor and the Médaille Militaire. Eugene Bullard was inducted into the Georgia Hall of Fame in 1994 and was also posthumously commissioned a second lieutenant in the United States Air Force, the successor service that rejected his service in World War I. Eugene Bullard completed his pilot training at Avord, France. I came across this note from someone who had a personal encounter with him. This writer will never forget the occasion when he was waiting at 23 Avenue du Bois to see Dr. Gross. Suddenly the door opened to admit a vision of military splendor such as one does not see twice in a lifetime. It was Eugene Bullard. His jolly black face shone with a grin of greeting and justifiable vanity. He wore a pair of tan aviator's boots which gleamed with a mirror-like luster, and above them his breeches smote the eye with a dash of vivid scarlet. His black tunic, excellently cut and set off a fine figure, was decorated with a pilot's badge, a Croix de Guerre, the Farage of the Foreign Legion, and a pair of enormous wings, which left no possible doubt, even at a distance of 50 feet, as to which arm of the service he adorned. The Elives, I know I'm misspelling that, and they were student pilots, gasped. The eyes of the neophytes stood out from their heads, and I repressed a strong instinct to stand at attention. There was scarcely an American at Avord who did not know and like Bullard. He was brave, loyal, and a thoroughly likable fellow. And when a quarrel with one of his superiors caused his withdrawal from the aviation corps, there was scarcely an American who did not regret the fact. He was sent to the 170th French Infantry Regiment in January 1918, from which date all trace of him had been lost. So, Eugene Bullard, a Harlem son, is buried in Flushing Cemetery in Queens, and he is honored by the government of France, the Federation of War Veterans, every year. The United States honors him. We honor his memory today. Vive la France, vive Eugene Jacques Bullard. Thank you. Okay. We're going to hear from Dr. Jennifer Wingate from St. Francis College. Please. And after Dr. Wingate, if you have a paper with a list, could you come forward if you can, because we're going to read the names after that. Okay, Jennifer? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Terry, for inviting me to this very special ceremony in Dorrance Brooks Park Square, Dorrance Brooks Square, named after Dorrance Brooks, a member of the 15th Regiment, reorganized as the 369th, known as the Hellfighters. The 369th were in the battle zone for an unprecedented 191 days without relief, a record unmatched by any other regiment during the war. In addition to honoring the service of all veterans and remembering the signing of the Armistance today that ended the war 100 years ago. Well, I'd like to say a few things about our remembrance of those events. After the armistice in 1918, it was still several months before U.S. servicemen returned home. The process of getting soldiers home was slow and hampered by logistical problems and planning failures. While the U.S. War Department undertook this immense effort, communities across the U.S. planned welcome home parades and other tributes. On February 19, 1919, 3,000 Hellfighters finally marched up Fifth Avenue from 23rd Street to 145th and Lenox. On that day, a crowd estimated at 2 million strong welcomed the heroes home, showering them with cigarettes, candy, and silver coins. The New York Tribune reported, "Up the wide avenue they swung. Their smiles outshone the golden sunlight. In every line, proud chests expanded beneath the medals valor had won." The impassioned cheering of the crowds massed along the way drowned the blaring cadence of their jazz band. The old 15th was on parade, and New York turned out to tender its dark-skinned heroes a New York welcome. And yet, after this celebratory moment, African-American veterans continued to fight discrimination. The period after World War I was a volatile one. In 1919 alone, there were 62 recorded lynchings of African Americans, and 10 of the victims were World War I veterans in uniform. James Baldwin wrote hauntingly of one such lynching in his 1953 book, Go Tell It on the Mountain. Richard Wright wrote, "Our black boys do not die for liberty in Flanders, they die in Texas and Georgia." W.E.B. Du Bois reported on the Hellfighters' homecoming parade. He wrote, "This country of ours, despite all its better souls have done and dreamed, is still a shameful land." Editor of the NAACP's journal, The Crisis, Du Bois had supported the involvement of African Americans in the World War. After the war, he wrote passionately about the need to keep fighting a battle for equality that had not yet been won. "We are cowards," Du Bois proclaimed in the pages of The Crisis in May 1919. "If now that the war is over, we do not marshal every ounce of our brain and brawn to fight a sterner, longer, more unbending battle against the forces of hell in our own land. We return from fighting, we return fighting." Du Bois filled the pages of The Crisis with photographs of uniformed African American veterans, understanding that dignified representations of black soldiers were part of that fight. But where are the representations of black soldiers and veterans in public space, in the public commemorative landscape of the nation? 2 congressional bills were introduced for 2 different national memorials to African American soldiers, but were never approved by the body that oversaw national monuments in D.C. Explaining his opposition to a bill authorizing a memorial in France, the African American 93rd Division, a Democratic representative from Maryland, argued that no discrimination should be made between the races. Monuments should be erected for American soldiers regardless of color. But they weren't. Monuments speak loudest by what they don't say or what they don't represent sometimes. Even when monument honor rolls included the names of African American soldiers, sometimes on segregated honor rolls, their sculpted figures did not portray black doughboys. The most popular forms of commemorative tribute after World War I were sculptures of fighting infantrymen nicknamed doughboys. They shored up Americans' confidence in the manhood of returning veterans and helped dispel fears about the mental and physical health and economic prospects of returning soldiers. When Chicago's Bronzeville neighborhood dedicated a column to commemorate Illinois' Black 8th Regiment, the French-American sculptor Leonard Crunel modeled 3 beautiful larger-than-life relief sculptures to decorate the memorial. The panels depict an African-American soldier, an African-American allegory of motherhood, and a female personification of Columbia holding a tablet with the names of the regiment's battles. The memorial, completed in 1928, was lovely, but where was the fighting soldier? The Chicago Defender reported that it was not truly representative of a fighting unit, that it was too passive. In response, the sculptor added a bronze, in-the-round sculpture of an African-American doughboy in 1936. The addition reflected not only the national urge to pay homage to the warrior ideal, but also the pressing need to recognize the manhood of African Americans who served bravely in the war as combat soldiers. There are only a few such black doughboy sculptures in the entire country, and none in New York City. However, there were artists, including the Harlem-based sculptor Augusta Savage, who were working to change how the Great War was pictured and remembered. Some artists who were pacifists chose not to make war memorials at all. Some, like the African-American sculptor Meta Vo Fuller, made several small sculptural sketches and models that were never enlarged into monumental form for reasons related to the complicated process and political nature of public art. Savage dedicated herself to the art community in Harlem and to sculpting African-American subjects. Her works entered private collections and museums, but few were realized as public monuments. Her most famous sculpture, the harp, inspired by James Weldon Johnson's hymn, "Lift Every Voice and Sing," was erected in plaster at the 1939 World's Fair. She was a powerful figure in the New Negro movement who founded an art academy in Harlem in 1932, and that same year the Works Projects Administration appointed her the first director of the Harlem Community Art Center. In 1937, Savage modeled a 7.5-foot group of a mother, widowed daughter, and son called After the Glory. Intended to commemorate the World War I service of the 15th Regiment and to be cast in bronze and erected on a granite pedestal. This is it. It was intended to be dedicated in Rucker Park, what is today Rucker Park, at 155th Street and 7th and 8th Avenues. But the monument was never realized. A photograph of the back of the full-size plaster model exists in the collection of the Schomburg Center. In the photo, the viewer can only see the back of the monumental draped form of the mother, her arm around the back of a second smaller figure, presumably her widowed daughter, whose head is bowed in grief. The photo is frustrating because we want to see more. We want to see Savage's tribute to the 15th Regiment from the front to see each of the three figures. We want to see what the sculpture would look like cast in bronze. Looking at the photograph, we're invited to imagine what it would look like on its granite pedestal in a park in Harlem. We're invited to imagine what if there were more World War I memorials that featured mothers and grieving widows rather than fighting soldiers. This is only one of the reasons why coming together to honor the past, to revisit and rewrite histories is so important. Because the process invites us to continue to imagine a better future, inspired by those we pay tribute to. Thank you.
Thank you. General James is here, but you know it's cold, so he's in the car. So afterwards, go over there and say hi. So we got his son, touch please by Honey Lamb.
Good afternoon, everybody. Here they come, after being insulted by the mayor of Spartanburg, South Carolina, and the people of New Jersey, and standing up in Long Island against an Alabama unit who was also being trained there. They were going to be attacked by the Alabama unit when the commander issued the order, "If you are fired upon, then return fire." That cooled the whole thing down. This order was issued by Hamilton Fish, a new congressman after the war. Here they come, departing from Hoboken, New Jersey on a steamship called the Pocahontas. Shipwrecked 3 times. Once after leaving port, the ship's boilers broke down and had to be towed back to port. Then they collided with another ship, but they repaired the damage. And then on the third crash with a British tanker, which they repaired on the damage on the way. Here they come, arriving in France at the port of Brice-Aguirre and ready for war. Once again, they were told they had to serve as labor forces. Colonel Haywood objected and said, "I didn't bring these boys over here to be a labor force. If they can't fight, send us home." With that remark, they were assigned to the French army. They were greeted with open arms. Here they come, the 369th Heavy Foot Infantry, heavy foot, not because they had big feet, but because they had heavy weapons and marched all the way. The first to the Rhine River, the first to cross into Germany. One of the most decorated units in the Great War. They won more decorations than any other unit. They were the first to march under the Arch of the Triumph upon their return home, and a parade up through Harlem. Thank you for your service, everyone.
Hello everybody, my name is Alex Rico. I'm the Flotilla Commander for the U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary Flotilla that's based up here. I just want to say thank you for everybody for coming. The Auxiliary is the uniformed volunteer service of the U.S. Coast Guard. We're honored to participate today. I'd like to introduce Aries de la Cruz from the Governor's Office and thank him for coming down here today.
I live a few blocks away, so it wasn't really quite that hard. Hi everyone, my name is Aries de la Cruz. I am the Governor's Manhattan Regional Representative. I'm also a member of the U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary. I'll make my remarks short, but for the people who have worn the uniform, they deserve we owe them our thanks, and we owe them our respect, and most importantly, we owe them our freedom. Veterans Day often comes just a few days after Election Day. It's been a very divisive one the past few years, but when Americans look to something that looks to unify them, I really think about Veterans Day and the people who serve our country in many different ways, and wearing the uniform, but also people like Commissioner Sutton, Senator Benjamin, the Colonel, and the people of the Dorrance Brooks Association who do everything they can to make sure that the injustices that the Harlem Hellfighters experienced are never happen to anyone else ever again. We can't undo those injustices, but we can work every day to make things better and to make things right. And so I have a letter here from the Governor to all of you. He was not able to make it because of a scheduling conflict. 1 second. This is what he wanted me to say to all of you. Dear friends, it is a pleasure to send greetings to everyone gathered for today's observance. It's been 100 years since the Armistice of Compiègne was signed, bringing an end to the conflict on land, sea, and air during World War I, a time when many courageous New Yorkers were fighting to uphold our freedom, democracy, and the founding values of our great nation. Among those courageous New Yorkers was